Fun fact about me. Did you know that I own lots of Batman comics? One might even say I own too many Batman comics, especially too many Batman comics that I have never read. The reason for this is that when I was young, dumb, and full of reading energy, I got my first job and I went, wow, look at all this income I'm earning a month. And at the same time, in said job, I was working in a shop, Eagle Moss debuted their Legend of Batman collection, and I went, £20 a month? Boy, do I suddenly have that to spare. And they would send you 2 physical Batman comics a month. And the idea was that when you finished the collection, you would have a chronological story of Batman's life from beginning to end. And having not really gotten into comics at that point, I failed to know that there were many different reboots of the DC universe and that this was actually going to get quite messy. But I stuck the course for the most part, and if you're wondering, you can go and check what exists on the wiki. I own everything up to volume 81, which is when they started to extend it, and I think I got annoyed and said, I'm not even reading most of these, what are you doing extending this? Cancel this! And Eagle Moss subsequently went out of business shortly afterwards. I take zero responsibility. The aim of this series is going to be me reading through every single one of these, and telling you kind of what happens in them, just in case you don't know, so that we can all be on the same page, and giving my thoughts, giving my reactions, talking about what I like, talking about what I don't like, maybe showing off panel art, which I think is really cool. At the start of each video, I will tell you what specific comics are collected in the volume that I am reading, so that if you own these, or if you have DC Comics Infinite, or whatever it's called, maybe you can go and read along at the same time. And so today, we will be starting with Batman Zero Year Part 1, which I have read before. Batman Zero Year Part 1 collects Batman Volume 2, issues 21 to 26, also known as the New 52 comics. If I remember right, they did like the first 3 trade paperbacks are to do with the Court of Owls, and then I think the 4th and 5th ones are basically Zero Year Part 1 and 2, but don't quote me on that. Please don't quote me on that. If I'm wrong, I will look like a fool, and I will feel very bad. How we're going to do this is I'm going to read an issue, give my thoughts on the issue, and go on from there, as well as telling you what happens in each specific issue, because I'm nice like that. I will also read you the blurb of the entire book. Volume 1, Zero Year Part 1. 5 years after he disappeared, Bruce Wayne has returned to Gotham City determined to wage war on crime. The city is in the merciless grip of a Red Hood gang, many of whose members have been blackmailed into a life of crime by the mysterious Red Hood Number 1. Before long, Bruce is forced out into the open, and his return becomes public. In order to continue his fight, he decides that he must become something more, the Batman. So issue 1 of this very beginning of Batman's story, according to Eagle Moss, starts in a very alienating kind of a way to what someone might expect when they first pick up the book. Rather than the moody blues and blacks of Gotham City that people might be used to, the reader is first shown a very kind of electric colour palette, which I think, pervades throughout this entire book. And it's one of a Gotham City which is kind of decaying and overgrown with plants and vegetation. And you've got this subway line which is just completely flooded, and you find someone fishing in it, and it says Gotham City 6 years ago, and Batman arrives on a motorbike looking very Wastelander-esque. So this book, right at the start, just throws the reader completely off guard with a whole bunch of unexpected shenanigans. And I must say, I do find the dialogue a little cheesy. When the kid he rescues is like, he thinks you're dead, ever since he killed the city. It's so like, the reader doesn't know what's happening, but hey, welcome to Nitpick Town, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing. I don't necessarily think it's bad, it's probably just a product of the fact that I have read this before, I've attempted to reread it on a video before, so I'm a little bit overly familiar with these first few pages. We're then taken even further back in time by another 6 months, and we're shown a very nascent kind of Batman venture before the Batman persona even exists, where Bruce Wayne is seemingly wearing the mask of another person's face on top of his, which is very interesting because later in this same run of comics, that's exactly what the Joker does to his own face. But we see him facing down the Red Hood gang, and again the reader is estranged from what they think they know, because the Red Hood, that's got nothing to do with what's going on here. The Red Hood is something that happens to one of the Robins later on down the line. So why is a Red Hood gang a thing, and why is it showing up now? And why is the leader wearing this weird glass red dome thing as his Red Hood? Again, it's just making strange what a reader thinks they know. I should also add, I'm not going to be giving away absolutely every little detail that happens in these comics. I'm not going to be going, and then in this panel, he gets in the van, and then in this panel, Alfred tells him he shouldn't be doing this, because then we'd be here all day. If you do want the full story, I will have to direct you to the comic itself. But again, I'll do my best to summarize. We then cut to Bruce training up physically while talking to Alfred about the Red Hood gang, and Alfred just wants Bruce to kind of stop what he's doing. It's too dangerous. He's gonna die. And he kind of reveals that he's only really joining Bruce on this venture to try and talk him out of it, really. And they get into a bit of an argument. It's funny as well, when we are showing Bruce training, we don't see him lifting weights or anything like that. We see him testing some anti-gravity boots on the ceiling while he lifts weights. And again, it's just this idea of like, the readers have seen this scene so many times before in so many different continuities and so many different ways. We need to do something new and unexpected. And while I think it is cool and it does overall benefit the story, I think maybe they go a little bit overboard on that sometimes. And speaking of the unexpected, Uncle Philip shows up. Uncle Philip takes Bruce for a drive to New Wayne Industries with a giant coin outside the front, which I'm pretty sure ends up in the Batcave at some point. And Bruce says, "You brought me here to see a penny?" And he's like, no, the building behind it. I thought you knew it was New Wayne Enterprises. And while on the surface this does seem kind of silly that Bruce would think, he's probably just being witty, like, "Oh, you brought me here to see a penny." It does kind of, evoke this metaphor of he can't see the forest for the trees. He's so focused on what's right in front of him that he can't see the wider life that he's returning to as Bruce Wayne, whether he wants to or not, and I think that's pretty good. I like that they mention that Kane Chemical is now part of Wayne Industries. I get the feeling they probably named Kane Chemical after Bob Kane, unless there's some Batman lore I'm unaware of, which is very possible at this moment in time. I also like how the top of the skyscraper of New Wayne Industry clearly has little bat ears. Uncle Philip tells Bruce a story about the time his father told him that he was dying, and Uncle Philip was in an actual cave, and he had to come out of his cave to accept the responsibilities of his father's work. And if that isn't a metaphor for Bruce having to come out of a Batcave to be Bruce Wayne, I don't know what is. Subtext is a wonderful thing. We're then shown a flashback of Bruce talking to his father. His father's asking him what he loves about Gotham, because Bruce has clearly been sneaking off to the city every night. And obviously Bruce is upset that he's been followed by his father's men. And he talks about the thing that he loves about Gotham is that you can be anyone that you want to be. He could be not Bruce Wayne. And I really love the idea that the seeds of the Batman were sown long before Bruce's parents even died. Bruce has always wanted to be someone that he's not. He's always wanted to escape the classism and I guess the privilege that he was born into in order to make real and effective change. And I guess that's something we'll probably end up talking about a lot as I read through these Batman comics is, Bruce Wayne as a billionaire versus Batman as a vigilante. Like, we know that most billionaires in the world probably aren't good people, but by the fact that they became billionaires and how they spend their wealth. And it's interesting to see how Bruce Wayne is portrayed as such a rich person. And I've been thinking a little bit about how the true heroism within Bruce Wayne comes from the fact that he abandons the safety of being a shut-in billionaire and actually, becomes a vigilante and gets hands-on with crime and that kind of thing. And obviously that comes with its own problems because of how brutal he is. This will all come with future comics and storylines. Anyway, in the same flashback, we're also shown a bit of Wayne technology, which is this orb that can be rolled into disaster sites to map out a 360-degree map of, the rubble and where survivors might be. And I think it's wild that it's like, wow, this is a pretty far-flung sci-fi technology to be throwing into a flashback, but I guess that's what this universe is. But I feel like this is probably going to come up later. I don't remember it coming up later, but I'm sure it will. Obviously, a lot of Wayne tech gets retrofitted into Bat tech eventually, so I wouldn't be surprised. It's then revealed that good old Uncle Philip is working with none other than Edward Nygma, the Riddler. And it's quite a reveal. You get dialogue before he shows up, you get little hints, little snatches of a question mark and, of the strings around a place as he's clearly, strung up a bunch of things to be like, oh, this is influenced by this, etc., etc. I've got to be honest, this entire scene reminds me of in like the MCU or in like modern DC movies when they have to try and make a very campy villain like in a more realistic light, and it's like, oh yes, we're not going to call him Edward Nigma because then people will realize that his name is Enigma, so we're going to say Nigma Edward, and it just feels a little stilted to me, but maybe that's because I'm looking for it. Anyway, the Riddler tells Philip that he needs to kill his nephew Bruce Wayne, and that's when we get the final 4 panels in this comic, which are the panels we expected to see this entire time. They are of a young Bruce Wayne exploring the gardens and finding a hole which will ultimately lead to the Batcave. I think it's a really strong first issue. Obviously, it throws you out of your depth and throws a bunch of things in the air and makes you go, wait, what the hell's going on? Everything from the opening plot to the colour palette, but as it goes on, it does become a little bit more familiar, and you do start to recognise the story that's taking place. Issue 2 begins with a little bit more of Bruce Wayne exploring that cave in a very childlike innocence, and then it is juxtaposed with more Red Hood gang violence back in the modern day, and you can see them killing the brother of Carmine Falcone, who will go on to become a notorious gangster within the city. See, I do know some Batman lore. Oh, sorry. Carmine Falcone is this guy's cousin, not brother. We then see the Red Hood 1 terrorizing who we think is the Penguin, and you're like, oh, look, a little proto-penguin. But it actually turns out to be Bruce Wayne in a penguin disguise. And I love this dialogue from Red Hood 1. It's you in there, isn't it? Our little vigilante. You are good, my friend. Is that a fat suit? And what are you? You 6'2"? Hot damn, and you had me convinced. Fantastic. It's just, considering who Red Hood 1 turns out to be later, it's good stuff. By the way, I do find it interesting that since this fake penguin turned out to be Bruce Wayne, he was there when Red Hood 1 pushed Luca Carmine out of the helicopter. And he does say, you didn't have to do that. But it makes me wonder, like, could he have stopped it? Did he decide not to stop it because Luca Carmine was such, like, a crime lord? Is this so early on in Bruce Wayne's life that he hasn't quite decided yet whether he's going to kill or not? Then we see Bruce Wayne, barely masked, make his daring escape with the real Penguin out of a blimp. They're on a blimp, by the way. Again, you should probably be reading along or have known about this beforehand. I'm not really doing a very good job of telling you everything. This was harder than I expected, okay? I'm sorry. Okay, we get a very little miniature flashback of kid Bruce Wayne falling down a cave, and then we jump to the modern, it's not a bat cave, but it's some kind of facility that Bruce is training in. And something I really like is as he's testing the grappling hook, in the background, you can just barely see like prototype bat suits. None of them are actually bat themed yet, but they're clearly like superhero suits that he's testing out. Alfred and Bruce are having this argument about whether Bruce Wayne's war on crime is even winnable. And I find this very interesting because flash forward to The Dark Knight Returns, different continuity obviously, but we see that Gotham is still a cesspool of crime and disorder, and it's quite tragic that Bruce Wayne is fighting a losing war. And there's also some discussion later on about the idea of, you know, maybe crime is getting more advanced because the crime fighters are becoming more advanced and one begets the other. The random act of violence which killed Bruce's parents that he's trying to snuff out will never be snuffed out because it's the nature of mankind to, at least, you know, from the perspective of the storytellers of Batman's story, it seems to be the nature of mankind that there will always be people committing random acts of violence. Bruce is fighting against a fate that cannot be overturned. Bruce says this war may not be winnable, but it's mine. On some level, he knows that he can't fix the world, but he wants to try anyway. It all comes back to this idea that him being Batman isn't about serving Gotham, it's about serving himself in some way. Probably, if we're going psychologically deep now, because he has some level of survivor's guilt. You know, he saw his parents gunned down in front of him, and he didn't have the power to stop it from happening. And, you know, while he can never go back in time and change that, I mean, I'm sure he's given that opportunity at some point. This is DC Comics. But, like, on a on a normal level, he never wants to feel that powerless again, as well as wanting to fulfill that fantasy which he must have had at that time, which is he wished there was someone around to help. Alfred hates that Bruce is turning to a life of vigilanteism, if that's a word, to fight the crime instead of actually using his power as Bruce Wayne, especially since Wayne Enterprises is part of the problem. Like, the people running Wayne Enterprises, Uncle Philip, is clearly letting weapons fall into the hands of a Red Hood gang. And Alfred thinks it is cowardly for Bruce to fight this as a ghost instead of as Bruce Wayne, as his parents did. Well, his parents didn't fight it as Bruce Wayne, you know what I mean. And he says his parents would be ashamed of Bruce, which is, a pretty wild thing to say. And then Bruce gets very angry and grabs Alfred by the collar, which is a big no-no. Don't do that, Bruce. Be nice to Alfred. He's a good man. Bruce claims that Alfred is the real coward because he has been, quote, living in a mausoleum polishing silver. So he's the real coward, and then Alfred slaps him. It's pretty ugly. Now, for the thing I do find quite silly about this scene, the entire scene, Bruce is practicing with that grappling hook, and it's like voice activated. He says, "Hook, come back. Hook, come back." And as Alfred is storming off to the manor, Bruce says, "Come back." And Alfred starts to turn, and he says, "I was talking to the hook." And like, it's clearly meant to be like this, oh, once again Bruce is caring more about, like, the Batman kind of vigilante, using the technology. He's clearly more engrossed in that than he is in the real world around him. But I think the way that it's actually told is just kind of silly. And then he gets really angry and pulls the wall down, because he's a man with lots of masculine angry energy, and yeah, look, he's macho power fantasy. And he doesn't he doesn't have emotional maturity. He has unresolved grief, which he is channeling into violence. Surprise, shocker, that's the Batman. Oh god, I'm really enjoying making this video. Eventually, Bruce does take Philip's advice, and he uses Bruce Wayne to go and talk to his Uncle Philip about this misused Wayne weaponry. That is hard to say. And then there's this really fun sequence when he's talking to his Uncle Philip, and at this point, obviously, Uncle Philip is cast as like this morally ambiguous man who might be a baddie and might not be a baddie. He might just be really stupid. And they're walking through this like pitch black museum, which is, again, very evocative of the later Batcave. You've kind of got these hints of Bruce's future running all throughout the scenery of this book. And Bruce is arguing with Philip, saying that they have to shut down operations until they can figure out what's going on with this Wayne weaponry getting into the hands of bad people. And his uncle's like, are you serious? No. I mean, he's like, look, come back into the public eye and we'll sort this out. And Bruce is like, no, Bruce Wayne has to stay dead. And his uncle is like, if you insist, and brings out a big red button and presses it. Now again, we don't know what Uncle Philip's motivations are. The last we saw of him, Edward Nygma was telling him to kill his nephew. But you turn a page and all he's doing is turning the lights on. And there's this big welcome home Bruce banner, and it's a surprise welcome home party for him with a bunch of people. And Uncle Philip is basically thrusting Bruce against his will back into the public eye and declaring him alive. And I think the scene is really fun because, in a way, he is killing Bruce in that moment. He's killing Bruce's anonymity. And then you've also got, like, what's said in the dark versus what's said in the light, Uncle Philip's dark side versus Uncle Philip's light side, his public-facing side. This is just very well done. I really enjoy this. Uncle Philip evokes the story again of his father coming down to his cave and pulling him out. And he says that that's what he's doing to Bruce. He also says that he and his father fought over this, and he split his skull, and he still has the metal plate to prove it. And I kind of dislike that detail, because not everything needs to be super over the top in that way. Anyway, Bruce turns and runs away deeper into the darkness, where he meets Edward Nygma once again, running into the darkness and meeting a dark figure from his future dark self's life. I'm deep, damn it. I like how Bruce accuses Edward of putting his uncle up to this surprise party. He's like, oh, actually, I suggested something else, but your uncle disagreed. And as the reader, you're like, he's talking about when he told him to kill him. That's dramatic irony. We then have a very interesting panel which is framed after the Ouroboros, or I guess a figure like it, and you've got kind of like these mini panels within where Bruce and Edward are kind of arguing. well, not even arguing, but Edward's kind of riddling at Bruce, and Bruce is figuring it out a little bit more quickly than Edward means to. And Edward gives away all this information about his uncle selling weapons to these criminals to try and keep them away from, I guess, stealing, like, worse weapons. And you get the impression that Edward's like, oh fuck, you figured it out quickly. And then in typical Batman versus Riddler fashion, Bruce figures out the riddle without really saying it until he actually goes to act on it, and Riddler's like, what are you doing, Bruce? And Bruce is like, oh, well, I mean, you said this, so that obviously means this. And then he solves the riddle, and he's just like, huh. And then this issue ends with Bruce arriving home, and the Red Hood being like, well, Red Hood 1 being like, oh, we thought we'd throw you our own welcome home party, Brucey, and then blowing his apartment up. There's also this incredible bit of artwork about Kid Bruce, kind of like, he's in silhouette, and like, he's kind of turning into bats, like this evocative imagery of he's trying to run from his own destiny, but it's literally like catching up to him. That's so cool. Issue 3 starts with an image of, Bruce pulling on a bat glove, but all you really see is his hands, silhouetted against the moon, promising that, hey, this is the one where he becomes Batman. It also opens with a very brief flashback of Thomas Wayne looking for Bruce in the cave. It's now nighttime. Clearly Thomas is panicked because he can't find his son, and this, of course, correlates to Bruce's current situation, in which his apartment building has just exploded and he is likely to be buried in the darkness, both literally and symbolically. And as we see speech bubbles, or maybe Bruce hears, his dad calling to him from all those years ago, we then also see someone from the present calling for Bruce, trying to find him, except this time it's Red Hood 1 who is pulling him out of the rubble and the fire, because the present is a warped future which does not care for the pains of the past. There we go, that sounded good, didn't it? I want to mention as well, before we steamroll past it, the reason Bruce is alive is because he seemingly pulled a old shield off the wall to shield himself from the explosion, which is metal as fuck. His room was full of, like, old weaponry from historical times. It's not apparent, by the way, if Red Hood 1 knows that Bruce Wayne was the vigilante, or if he's just showing up now because the Red Hood gang is comprised of some of the nobility, I guess, of Gotham City, and he's trying to recruit him or otherwise assassinate him in some way. There's also this interesting imagery at the start of this comic of a bunch of chains around a gate, and while Bruce is being beaten up by the henchmen of Red Hood 1, we then see that chain breaking, which kind of, I guess, is supposed to symbolize something inside of Bruce snapping and probably leading to the vigilante he's about to become. The Red Hood then monologues, again, I keep calling him the Red Hood, I know technically he's not, but you know what I mean. Red Hood 1 then monologues a bit about Bruce's parents' death and how it kind of like was almost the original sin of Gotham's descent into crime and debauchery. It must have been the worst day of your life the day they died. Well, I mean, besides today, of course. I'm sure this will shock you, Bruce, but the truth is, it changed my life too. Your parents' deaths changed my life forever. Martha and Thomas Wayne, scions of the city, do-gooders, titans, gunned down by a nobody, over nothing, for no reason. I remember my foster parents buying a lock for the door the next day. Our neighbours came home with a Saturday night special. Because at the end of the day, what people are afraid of is the nothing of it, Bruce. The randomness, the empty centre. Stare into it and try to find meaning, you'll go mad. All you can do is fear and survive. It's the truth. That's what this gang is, you see, Bruce. I came up with the idea for it in the wake of your parents' death. In that wonderful moment, that true moment, right after. See? We wear the red hood to court the wolf rather than hide. Eat us, we say, eat us all. And you could criticize this as being like, oh, like the lore of Batman has taken on this otherworldly thing, and now when you pump that lore back into the own world that it came from, suddenly like Bruce's parents, being all like this important murder that changed the way the city saw itself and inspired these villains, is a little bit much, but I actually really like it. Red Hood 1 then says that Bruce reminds him of this vigilante that they've been dealing with, who he finds very funny for trying to deal with all of this crime. And I think, yeah, it's meant to be inferred here that, yeah, Red Hood 1 knows who he is. I also love the detail that Red Hood 1 shoots the images of Thomas and Martha and says, "Here's to symmetry," and then leaves Bruce bleeding on the floor, presumably dead. Ah, but our villain didn't count on the indomitable spirit of our protagonist as he gets back up and limps his way back towards Batcave 0.5 or whatever they call it. This is interspersed with scenes of Bruce escaping the Batcave of his youth for the first time and limping his way into the safety of his father and mother's arms. His parents' arms. Why did I say it that way? We're then shown Uncle Philip confronting Edward Nygma and blaming him for sending Red Hood 1 after Bruce and killing him. Turns out Uncle Philip really is just kind of an idiot. He doesn't really have any malice towards his nephew. He's mad that now he is presumably dead. In this confrontation against the future Riddler, Uncle Philip, good old Uncle Phil, he claims that there is a giant AC magnet underneath the floor which can wipe all of the computer's databases, erasing, any evidence that he worked with the Riddler or Edward Nygma, as he becomes this stain on the pavement, which is what he is threatening to do to him. But Edward Nygma is one step ahead, can you believe it? And he knows the password, and he evokes it, and remember Uncle Philip's metal plate in his head, which I thought was just a dumb extra detail to sound cool? Well, now his head has slammed into the ground. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, eh, Philip? If only you'd had that plate in your skull installed a year later. It'd be stainless steel and non-magnetic. Philip has some parting shots as well. He says that Edward Nygma is and always will be nothing but an empty question mark, which is a pretty fire thing to be able to come up with on the fly when your skull is being magnetized to the floor. Anyway, cut back to Bruce, and it turns out that Alfred saved his life after all. Alfred talks about how the doctors said that when Thomas and Martha were in the hospital, even if they had been shot in the hospital, there would have been no hope for them. But Alfred, in the war, he was so good that he was able to save the lives of people that everyone said were done for. So I guess Alfred too has some survivor's guilt. But he says that even if they have their disagreements, he will always be there to patch up Bruce. Bruce then wanders into his father's study and talks to a bust that was made of him, talking about how he's failing. And he's saying, show me what to do. And as he does so, he's clutching that spherical ball, that piece of technology that was mentioned earlier, which could take a 3D map of a particular location and use it to help people. And he activates it, and it floods the study with a 3D image of what will eventually become the Batcave. And that's fucking glorious, isn't it? Bruce says, yes, I see. And he throws open the double windows, and in comes a swarm of bats. Maybe because they think it's an actual cave in there. Maybe just because it's symbolism, damn it. And he says, yes, I will become a bat. And it's so fucking gothic, and it's so fucking cool. I love this scene because it has to be something pretty damn powerful, which, encourages Bruce Wayne to take on the mantle of the Batman. This figure that, is literally a bat incarnate. Like, it seems a bit random, but when you see a scene like this, you can see how it would have that much of an effect on him when he's at this point in his life, at this point in his psyche, and this crazy supernatural gothic thing happens to him as he's asking for a message from his departed father on what to do. There's also some potential head trauma involved, which helps. Going forwards, I'm sure we will see many other versions of this scene, but I would not be surprised if this one remains my favourite. And I believe issue 3 ends with that image of him holding the bat helmet. Looking at it from Bruce's point of view, we're looking at the bat helmet. Thing is, it's kind of hard to tell when issues end and begin when they're compiled together in these I keep wanting to say trade paperbacks, but they're not. They're literally hardbacks. Trade hardbacks? But I assume that's the end of issue 3. Thank you for sticking with me as we go through this. There's 2 more to go. I didn't intend to talk about these things for as long as I am, but there is a lot more to talk about than I thought there would be. Issue 4 starts with Bruce's new aerodynamic haircut, which I think is kind of a symbolic rebirth for him, and we also see how he's healed up from his injuries previously. Alfred is now also seemingly a little more on board. And then we're treated to the first appearance of the Batman chronologically in this series. It's very, it's been done before, it's what you expect, but it's also what you want to see. It's a bunch of Red Hood 1's henchmen doing some illegal activities. You know what they're doing, they're putting some stuff into the back of a truck or some shit, and then they're gossiping about, oh man, I'm not worried about the cops, I'm worried about, have you heard about that thing? And it's like, the cops made it up, man. The cops made it up to scare people off of doing crime. And then one of them goes on a little bit of a monologue, and then he turns around, and then he's like, 67? What? Where did you go? I like his monologue, by the way. He's basically saying that Gotham is full of supernatural superstition and none of it has ever been real. And here comes Bruce Wayne, the Batman, here to make it real. He also alludes to stuff about owls not being real. I wonder if that has any weight in anything at all ever. But Batman has, tangled up all of these criminals in strings, and he has arranged them on the billboard that says, "Welcome to Gotham City, best in the country," and instead it says, "Welcome to," and it's the symbol of a bat made out of people. Welcome to Bat Country. That's very symbolic and also insanely impractical and difficult to pull off. I don't see how he did that in the space of a few minutes, but who am I to complain? He prompts a newspaper headline. "What do you want with the city, Batman?" We then see Red Hood 1 spouting a diabolical monologue, just all about Gotham's planned rebuilding with this new kind of concrete. And it's got all of these amazing properties to it, which is going to help it withstand, the forces of nature and the forces of the gods. But what he really wants to know is how does it taste? And he fills the mouths of the Red Hood henchmen who failed him with it, which is disgusting and horrific and amazing. Well, I was assuming it's the people who failed him, but it might just be people that he doesn't like and he's stuck Red Hoods on, I'm not sure. And then we've got a scene of Batman poring over these city maps and trying to figure out what the Red Hood gang are planning, and they're taking things in places which are seemingly random but are too random, Alfred. And this is just some good old Batman sleuthing, isn't it? It's wild to me that Bruce goes to Uncle Philip and tells him, "I can stop the Red Hood gang." It's like, buddy, you've just assumed this new secret identity. Do you really want to be giving it away that quickly? Uncle Philip shows Bruce this kind of exhibition he's got on display at the top of Wayne Enterprises, this giant rock, this bedrock which has been carved out of Gotham City, and he's talking about how it was surprisingly difficult to kind of like whittle down to shape. It's difficult, it's unbending, it's unrelenting. And Bruce is like, "Yes, it is." And I think Bruce Wayne might be talking about the city of Gotham itself, Uncle Philip says, "Pennyworth, he's bringing you out of your cave, is he?" And he's like, "I wouldn't go that far." And then you cut to him going into the cave. "The metaphor I talked about earlier, it's being paid off now." I do love this nascent bat cave we find, which is just like, a small hole with some laptops in it. I have to wonder, wouldn't it be symbolic if you had like an end of Batman's life story far, far in the future, where they've done so much digging underneath to, expand the Batcave, that the foundations of the underneath the manor have become unstable and eventually they collapse inwards as Batman dies or something. I don't know if anyone's ever written something like that, or if maybe they have and it's just deep in my subconscious and I'm accidentally plagiarizing it by talking about it here. But if I were to write a comic at the end of Batman's life, I think that'd be a pretty neat idea. Okay, so then Bruce Wayne decides to appear on the news as Bruce Wayne and give a giant speech about what it means to be a resident in Gotham City, what people love about Gotham, about how it's like this grueling, challenging place that kicks people down and they have to embrace their inner heroism to defy it and rise up against the difficulties. And I'm thinking, bro, people probably just don't have the funds to move away. And he follows it up by talking about I know, typical billionaire speak, am I right? He follows that up by publicly revealing that in the chemical plant behind him, the Red Hood gang is brewing this chemical explosive that it's placed around multiple areas in the city, and the Red Hood gang respond by shooting missiles at him that he has to dodge, and it's all very action movie, I must say. Bruce Wayne then emerges unscathed, looking very cool as fire billows around him, going, "Alfred, it's time." I'm like, don't you feel a little bit responsible for putting all of those reporters into the line of fire? Aren't you worried about the Red Hood gang that are still nearby? No, we're just doing it for cool points now. I do also find this funny because other depictions of Bruce Wayne in other continuities are ones of this dumb idiot billionaire who doesn't really do much with his life. He's just kind of a playboy. And this is an image that Bruce concocts to kind of hide his double identity. But in the New 52 continuity, which is what this particular story is a part of, Bruce Wayne is more of a philanthropist, and he's more giving with his money, and he's more active as Bruce Wayne to try and make the city a better place to live. And I think that's pretty cool, actually. But again, this Eagle Moss collection tries to posit this as one long story, all in one continuity, with one timeline. So I like the idea that Bruce Wayne appears back in public and does all of this crazy heroic shit in public, and then later on he's just going to be this like, oh yeah, Bruce Wayne, yeah, that billionaire, oh yeah, he's just an idiot, he doesn't do anything. Bruce goes charging into the facility alone and gets caught by Red Hood 1 himself, and they have a bit of a tiffy, they have a bit of an argument. Red Hood 1's grand plan is to, I guess, destroy the city and do it on the anniversary of Bruce's parents' death, and continue the act of random pointless killing and end it in a great big circle of random pointless killing. And Bruce is like, I mean, yeah, their killings might have been random and pointless, but my parents' lives had meaning. I'm like, oh good, I guess bro went to therapy at some point. I'm still surprised that he did this as Bruce Wayne and not as Batman, though. Like, I get going on TV publicly as Bruce Wayne to say all of that stuff, but then when you're going into the facility, you can have, I don't know, popped the cowl on. And then there's a power outage, and from the helicopter view downwards, the power outage is the shape of a bat. So that's unnecessarily cool. We had a lot of symbolism earlier. Now we're getting to the point in the story where they're like, now it's just cool shit happening. Although I guess that is literally symbolism, but you know what I mean. Oh, okay, I get it now. So because there's been some suspicion on Bruce Wayne as being this vigilante earlier from Red Hood 1, he concocts this plan to, drown the place in darkness and then set up some kind of double, some kind of body double of himself, and then become Batman, and then dive down onto himself and be like, come on, Bruce Wayne, come with me, and save Bruce Wayne so that nobody ever thinks that they're the same person. We're then treated to a delightful spectacle of panels in which Batman beats the living crap out of a Red Hood gang. At one point it looks like one person in the gang has him dead to rights. He's pulled a gun on him, he says, hold it right there. And Batman's talking to Alfred, he's like, how we're looking? And Alfred's like, not yet, sir. He's like, alright, back to work then. And then he continues to kick the shit out of a Red Hood gang, because of course he does, he's Batman. He breaks someone's arm, and he's like, my arm, you broke the bone. And he's like, bones, plural. There's this really fun and cartoonish sequence where Batman's at the top of a bunch of stairs, and he attaches the grapple hook to one of the members of the Red Hood gang that he beats up, and he jumps down to the bottom of the stairs with him. Then he pulls it back and lets it go, and it shoots the guy back up the stairs and bumps into all of the other Red Hood gang members on the stairs as Batman follows and I guess kicks the shit out of him as he goes. If I was to look at this with a critical eye, I'd be saying, well, this is Batman's earliest outing. How is he so good at this already? I know he's done a lot of training, but he hasn't got a lot of fighting experience, but I don't know, I guess it's just fun, isn't it? We see Red Hood gang member 347 try to shoot Red Hood 1, and anyone who was paying attention to scenes earlier in the story that I did not mention in my commentary would know that Uncle Philip was branded with RH347. Red Hood 1 says, 347, I'm going to assume that was a stray bullet and forgive you. And then he shoots him dead and says, I'll kill you, but I still forgive you. And Batman hears this and he's like, 347? No! Commissioner Gordon arrives on the scene and finds Batman cradling the body of Uncle Philip. And he threatens to shoot Batman and says that he needs to come quietly. Batman says, you need to step back, now. And it's like he pulls a gun on him and he's like, oh yeah, really? Huh? Oh, we're doing this kind of thing? And then he shoots him with a rubber bullet, and it's to move Commissioner Gordon out of the way of a falling steel beam. And I think this is important because it shows firsthand to Commissioner Gordon that, Batman shooting him with a gun, that is what it looks like on the surface. But what was really happening was Batman was pushing him out of the way to save his life. And that is the kind of thing that's important for Commissioner Gordon to know as a person who is going to trust Batman when the rest of the police force do not. Appearances can be deceiving, and a man who runs around dressed up as a dark bat beating people up isn't the bad guy. Commissioner Gordon then quickly decides it's not worth going after Batman, we need to get the hell out of here. Apologies, I misspoke, he's not the commissioner yet, he's just a lieutenant. Anyway, here's a fun detail. As Red Hood 1 tries to get away in a helicopter, he says, so long, bats! And doesn't that sound familiar? Batman stops Red Hood from escaping, and they have a very fraught battle in the middle of this exploding gas warehouse, or whatever this place is, gas chemical facility. At one point, Red Hood 1 is stuck on a catwalk, which is about to fall down into the fiery pits below, and Batman says, come on, it's over, take my hand. And Red Hood 1 says, ha, wouldn't you like to think so? No, see, it's only just beginning. Which is a very weird thing for someone who's about to fall to their death to say, with a big smug grin on his face. But he does fall into a vat of acid as Batman tries to save him. And hey, you know who's said to have fallen into a vat of acid as their origin story? Yeah, Red Hood one's the Joker, if you didn't know already. They did an origin story for the Joker, and it worked. It worked. The whole problem with doing an origin story for the Joker is, hey, you would have to give away his identity, and that's kind of gonna ruin the Joker. And I know later on they kind of do that with Joe Chill or whatever, but I really like this version of the story because he's already this villainous, slightly mad, but not quite insane, villainous man. And he gives allusions to the idea that, as a kid, Thomas and Martha's murders changed him, and like looking into the pointlessness of their murders was like looking into the void. And I love the idea that this is the original sin that created the Joker, as well as also throwing Gotham into chaos. I don't know if it's fully confirmed that Red Hood 1 was absolutely definitively the Joker, but it's very, very, very much alluded to in this story. Anyway, we cut to the Batcave with Bruce Wayne sitting in front of the giant new bat pewter, or whatever it's called, and Alfred's like, "Are you sure the screen needs to be that big, sir?" And Bruce is like, "Batman doesn't do subtle, Alfred." And I just like that exchange. That's fun. We get some weird explanation as to how Bruce Wayne doubled himself. He created a feedback loop in the vision of a night vision goggles that Red Hood 1 was wearing. But how does that work when he swoops in and picks himself up? I don't know, man. Oh, I've misremembered the end of this. It's not as simple as Red Hood 1 was the Joker. It's Red Hood 1 was originally a man named Liam Distal, and at some point the man who would be the Joker murdered him and took his place, and we don't know whether that happened months ago, weeks ago, or days ago. They could be two separate characters at different points in the story. Alfred then has this brilliant speech about the fact that one of the reasons he doesn't think people are going to figure out that Bruce Wayne is the Batman is because people like to believe in the idea that they're not watching an actor when they're watching a stage play, they're watching these characters play it out, and that it's going to be the same with Batman. People are going to want to believe that the Batman is real, that he's not just, someone playing the role of the Batman. He is the Batman that is his entire existence, and I think that's a really cool idea. They finally make up, by the way, Alfred and Bruce. They finally say sorry to each other. And Alfred's like, "You're sharing the jail cell with me when they find out, and that's Master Bruce to you." And Alfred's like, "Oh, Master Bruce, your parents would be proud." And that's when Edward Nygma shows up and decides to be the great big bad Riddler taking over Gotham, which is going to lead us into part 2. And then Edward Nygma poses a riddle, which is the riddle of the two sphinxes. One gives birth to the other. One is the day and one is the night. And then the whole city explodes and crazy stuff happens, and it's the end of the issue, and we've got one issue left to go. Can you believe that? This next issue starts with a bunch of soldiers in the desert, and they find a door in the floor, and they open it, and then it cuts away. And I don't remember what this is, but it's very reminiscent of a scene in Batman vs Superman, and I think they either ripped it off from that or vice versa. Let's be real, the comic version was probably the original. That's usually how that goes. We then cut to Gotham shrouded in darkness, as the Riddler, of course, has removed all the lighting of the city. I'm running out of words. I'm running out of the ability to construct coherent sentences. This video has gone on for too long. Anyway, we're introduced to the first version of the Batmobile. The police are not hunting for the Riddler, they are hunting for Batman, because of course they are. This Batmobile is rushing down the cops, which have taken place at the end of a tunnel with a blockade, and it jumps right over them in a very goofy looking fashion. We then cut back to Lieutenant Gordon, who is looking at the scene of a murder, which the police believe that Batman committed, even though, Gordon pretty much knows, he was just here to have a look. And you get the impression that Lieutenant Gordon is very much already at the end of his tether, having, seen his entire department chase Batman around, when he knows that Batman is just trying to do good. As he says, what kind of murderer kills someone and then returns to the crime scene to check for clues? Now, I've got to say, this run of Batman is very interested on this kind of body horror aspect of things, and there is now a string of killing which is causing people's bones to kind of break and twist and grow until they become these horrible mutilated bone tree corpses. That's what we're heading into with the next section of this story. I don't actually remember much about this, so I'll probably be relearning it as we go. Gordon then lays out everything I was just saying from him about how he's frustrated about the police chasing Batman instead of protecting the city under a blackout. We also then meet Pamela Isley, a very normal looking girl who I'm sure nothing bad will ever happen to. The lab scientist who figured out how to make people's bones grow until it ripped them apart from the inside out is given the nickname Dr. Death, and I don't know if he is a previous villain within the Batman lore or if this is his first appearance. I don't actually know. Bruce Wayne is complaining to Alfred that there isn't anyone in the police force worth a damn as he climbs out of a Batcave and is greeted by Lieutenant Gordon, who says, "Please go on, Mr. Wayne." Then we're given a surprising show of hostility between Bruce and Lieutenant Gordon, because apparently Lieutenant Gordon hid some details about the night of his parents' murder. Again, this is a subversion of expectations. We see Lieutenant Gordon, we see Bruce Wayne, we expect, they're going to be friendly with one another, but no, there is some hostility. Lieutenant Gordon expresses some interest in just what they're keeping down there in the caves, and so Bruce says, "Be my guest, go and take a look." And then he presses a button and summons bats to attack Lieutenant Gordon. We're then met with another subversion of expectation as Bruce Wayne turns to Lucius Fox for help. And we all know Lucius Fox, he's a good guy, right? But it turns out that he is apparently working in tandem with Dr. Death, and he stabs Bruce with a syringe. We are then presented with Dr. Death face to face, and he is a truly horrific motherfucker. At the end of this issue, we then check in with the soldiers in the desert, and it shows their entire caravan on fire, and dead people in the sand, and the helmet saying Tokyo Moon, and this all means some vague thing which we're going to learn later, I'm sure. The cover art, or at least the initial image, I assume it's the cover art for this next issue, is gorgeous. It is a skeletal hand poking out of, I guess, a deserty area, and Batman standing on its fingertips looking at the silhouetted city of Gotham. We're then met with a flashback of Kid Bruce watching that Zorro movie, so this is clearly the night that his parents were shot, and Lieutenant Gordon shows up in front of him and says, "Bruce Wayne, you're under arrest," alluding further to this conflict between Bruce and Commissioner Gordon, but again, cutting away before it tells us anything. And I gotta say, I don't love this method of storytelling, of constantly hinting at things, and then leaving the reader out to dry while they then go like, anyway, back to the story at hand. But again, I'm sure in due time we will learn what this is all about. I have no memory of this, if I'm being perfectly honest. We then see Dr. Death trying to stab Lucius Fox with this serum, this bone-enhancing, this bone-growing serum in his ear. There's a tiny ear bone that apparently you can reach, but Bruce wakes up and saves him just in time. And I have to say, I have no idea what the fuck is going on at this particular point. It's a very weirdly structured volume of comics, because it definitely feels like the main story that I came here for ended a couple of issues ago, and now it's just veering off into unrelated territory. Dr. Death then alludes to the fact that Bruce Wayne, as a kid, had blood on his hands, and starts to tell him a story, and then Bruce Wayne sucks him into a jet engine, which was lying around the place. Again, what the fuck is going on? Turns out Lucius was only playing the villain in order to be able to inject Bruce with a vaccine against the bone-growing serum. Dr. Death then pops up again, even more mutated, grabs Bruce's head, almost splits his skull, and is stopped when when Lieutenant Gordon shoots him in the back and says, "Step away from the billionaire and put your claws in the air," because this is a jovial story after all. We then flash to another time when Bruce is in, I guess it's an Arabian setting of some sort, and like he's got really long hair and a really long beard and he looks really unhealthy, and people are trying to wake him up, so clearly this is a flashback while he's sleeping. There's some guy in a turban and with face paint, and he's telling him that his father is on the phone, even though his father should be long deaf at this point. He says, long deaf, long dead, and he says, "Oh, the soft death awaits." I really dislike it when stories get this abstract, and ooh, what's this now? You don't know what's going on here, do you? And it's just like 17 different things you have to put in your back pocket and remember as the plot continues to unfold. Sorry, I was really enjoying this earlier, and now I'm becoming quite disillusioned. Okay, so then Gordon shows up, and it's revealed that we see the past. We see that Gordon arrested, quote-unquote, arrested Bruce Wayne as a kid because he was playing truant, and as he and his fellow officer were escorting Bruce home, they kept making several stops along the way, and Bruce asked why this was, and Gordon said it's because they were checking in with the residents of Gotham to make sure that they were safe and accounted for, and eventually this other cop came back with a nice new trench coat for Gordon. And it turns out that the trench coat was a payoff because these two police officers, including Gordon, were corrupt. and that is why Bruce has such little faith in the police system. The law enforcement system. What am I trying to say? Something like that. This is a pretty rapid departure from the character of Gordon that I am used to, so I will see what happens next. Oh, Bruce Wayne pulls a gun on Gordon because he says that later that night this is what his parents saw. Oh, but he gives him his gun back. So I'm guessing that whatever happened leading up to that night was somehow Gordon's fault, and that forever changed him as a human, and now he's not corrupt anymore. Then this issue ends when Batman goes to check in on some more of the scientists that helped develop this horrible bone virus thing, and he found that it was too late, and that they had already been injected with it, and just as he turns to leave, wouldn't you know it, Commissioner Loeb, and I assume it's Commissioner Loeb, and the other cops show up, and they think he did it, and they open fire, and that's the end of the issue and the end of the entire book. This is, of course, part 1 of 2. We still have 0 Year Part 2, which is its own collection of comics which finish up this story. So, 0 Year Part 1. What did I think overall? Well, I really enjoyed the story up until the end of the Uncle Philip arc, the end of a Red Hood arc, I guess. And then things got radical and weird, and in my opinion, a little bit up their own arse in how radical and weird they were. Like, obviously it started this way, of like this flash forwards and showing you this strange Gotham, and making you lose your footing in terms of what you were expecting from a Year Zero story for Batman. But I thought it was in a dosage that was pretty well suited for the story they were telling, whereas as things have gone on, I feel like it's gone a little bit overdone, a little bit overblown, a little bit almost cocky in its own strangeness. I think the smoking gun for that is definitely Lucius Fox. Like, you weren't expecting that, were you? In this origin story where you know Lucius Fox to be a good character, you weren't expecting him to turn on Bruce and stab him with a needle, were you? And then 2 pages later, oh, he did it for Bruce's own good. He's actually a good guy. There's a good reason behind this. And I feel like the same thing is probably happening with Gordon as well. But again, overall, I have really enjoyed this read-through of this book. Now, I have to say I did not expect this to take up my entire day, but it has. So as much as I would love to promise these weekly, I cannot, because I do not have that much free time. My ideal version of this video would have included images to showcase the things that I am talking about a little more, properly, helping people to keep up a little bit more if they haven't read the issue, but as it is, this is going to have to be kind of a podcast thing for people who are familiar with the source content. But if you would like more of these, please let me know by liking the video, commenting if you will, and subscribing for more. I will see you in whatever I make next.